Let's talk about section number 1 in your manual. Okay, so anything that you see with a gold colored banner at the top means we are still in section number 1, and that's going to start on page number 2 of your manual. Okay, so here we're going to talk about the overview of the program. We're going to briefly mention who we are, and then we're going to talk about the fact sheet, or the 5 W's of what is an ambassador, and that includes who, what, where, when, and why. So let's do our overview first. And I like to think of ambassadors as information referral specialists who provide senior relevant information to help older adults and their caregivers meet their basic day-to-day needs. And then ambassadors don't just distribute that community connection for older adults newsletter that I mentioned a moment ago, but they also distribute other forms of senior relevant information that can come in the form of flyers and pamphlets and brochures. And so these newsletters are distributed to various types of local locations, and those might include senior centers and senior housing, which often have community or resource rooms where an ambassador could meet with an older adult or make a presentation. Other types of places might be faith-based organizations and civic groups and neighborhood groups or associations. So what you can see already is that we're starting to already kind of build a baseline for you of types of places where you could get started as an ambassador to distribute this senior relevant information. And then as we move through this section, we're going to build on these broad types of locations so that you can have a good idea of where you might want to start distributing this senior relevant information. And then as you get more experience under your belt as an ambassador, you might want to customize your list of possible locations based on the knowledge of your neighborhood and where you live and work. And that the last piece in this overview is that as an ambassador, you're receiving this orientation to really better prepare you to make linkages and connections to various types of aging services and programs and information and referrals. So let's talk about who we are. So as the Neighborhood Ambassador Program, we're really a collaborative initiative that's supported by the Aging Services Council and Coming of Age. And a discussion about this partnership really goes beyond the scope of our orientation today. But a minute ago when I told you about the documents to print out, you saw one sheeter for the Aging Services Council and one for Coming of Age, and that'll give you some additional information about these two organizations. In the meantime, if you want to go online and learn a little bit more detail about what they do, here's the website address for the Aging Services Council and the one for Coming of Age. Okay, so now we're going to be transitioning into the 5 W's of what is an ambassador, and this is known as the fact sheet. And so we're going to be answering the questions who, what, where, when, and why. And we're going to get started with the why question first because we've already partially answered that when we said that many older adults and their caregivers need this reliable and accurate information about aging issues that's going to help them meet their basic day-to-day needs. But the other important feature to it is that it's a completely unique, free service for older adults and their caregivers who need this assistance, but they just don't know who to ask. And so that's why we have the Neighborhood Ambassador Program. Now let's look at who are ambassadors. Well, the program is a volunteer-driven organization made up of a community of committed volunteers who work in elder services and advocacy through the Aging Services Council. And really this community of committed volunteers are intergenerational, so they can be recruited and trained. They're of any age, and they're going to provide this information and referrals, and these folks will be known as neighborhood ambassadors. And so neighborhood ambassadors are really the outreach arm of our program, and they serve as these information specialists and distribute all these types of senior relevant information in local public settings, some of which we just identified a minute ago, our senior centers, our senior housing, our neighborhood groups, and so forth. So let's stay on this who question for just a second by saying some of the skills that an effective ambassador will have, and this will help you make a determination about whether being an ambassador would be a good fit for you. And so first, you need to be warm and welcoming. You're going to be in the business of people, and so you really want to be positive and cheerful when you meet with older adults. And then you need great oral and written communication skills. You're going to be setting up appointments to meet one-on-one with older adults or making presentations, so you need great interpersonal skills. Then you need great planning and organizational skills. You're going to be assembling all of the resources and tools, some of which we'll talk about in section number 4. Anything that you think would be useful to older adults, including that resource manual I mentioned a moment ago. Then you need the ability to conduct presentations and encourage participation. So you may want to brush up on your public speaking skills and actually practice your presentation in front of a warm and welcoming group. Maybe that's family, friends, and neighbors. And then you want to encourage people to ask questions, because some of the questions that older adults may have, others may want to know the answer to as well. And then under no scenario are you going to identify anyone that you meet with, so respecting the confidentiality of these folks is extremely important. And then you need to be a reliable, self-motivated self-starter, which means you need to show initiative and be independent, because there's not really going to be anyone sort of looking over your shoulder to make sure that you're engaged in ambassador activities. And then having basic computer skills is also extremely helpful, and we'll talk about some of the reasons for that when we get to section number 4. Okay, so that wraps up the who question, where? So what are some other distribution locations where you could get started as an ambassador besides the ones we mentioned a minute ago? And so first, you might want to consider clinics. Older adults frequently need more medical care than others, so that might be an option for you. Or libraries, they frequently have resource rooms or community rooms where you could meet with older adults, make small presentations there. Social or recreational types of places. We maintain a presence at the WellMed Charitable Foundation, which is a senior activity center located on Ben White Boulevard. It's a brand new facility. It's just absolutely beautiful, and they have a big exercise room there. That might be a place for you to get started. You might want to tap into the knowledge of your friends and your families and your neighbors. That may have some ideas for you. Or even your professional affiliation. Some people have to maintain a certain license for their professional, and so that might be, or profession, that might be an option for you. Or maybe in the workplace there's a room where you can meet with older adults or make a small presentation. So there's some additional ideas. So when is an ambassador going to serve? Well, an ambassador is only required to serve 2 to 3 hours a month. And so you might say, well, wow, that's just really a low amount of time that I'd have to serve. And the reason why we came up with the 2 to 3 hours a month is because we really wanted to make it doable for people with busy lives and competing demands. And so we certainly want to encourage you to serve more than that, but the minimum requirement is only the 2 to 3 hours a month. What are the activities that an ambassador is going to get engaged in? Well, first, you're already completing the first bullet, right, which is to attend this orientation. You're going to become knowledgeable about all of the ambassador's materials, including the PowerPoint and the manual and any other type of senior relevant information. Then you're going to be distributing that Community Connection for Older Adults newsletter, which is going to be a very important activity that all ambassadors are engaged in. You're going to be scheduling your own information and referral sessions, probably at some local public settings that we just talked about. You're going to have 2 very simple administrative requirements called the confidentiality agreement and the monthly report. We'll talk about that more in a later section. And then placing ambassador information in affiliated newsletters. This is a nice idea. There may be, for an example, you want to go to a neighborhood association that's in your community, and maybe they produce a monthly calendar of events. And you notice that in the Community Connection for Older Adults newsletter that there's a great article there that might be of interest to older adults who are 50 plus, and so you might want to consider putting it in a neighborhood association bulletin of some type, or at the very least just sharing your contact information so that people know who you are and that you're a resource in the community if people have questions or need information. Alrighty, so that wraps up section number 1 of our orientation. Next, we're going to be moving on to section number 2.